Okay, can I have your attention, please? Can I have your attention, please? It is Pro Bono Month, and the law school is hosting a presentation by our 2000 grad, Amy Lorenz-Moser, who's one of my favorite people on the face of this earth. I met Amy in the late 1990s when she was a student in my family violence clinic. She looked like every other student for about 10 minutes until she started to volunteer for every hard project or case that we had. And I began to realize that she had this knee-jerk response to difficult cases. And so it was that she volunteered to write a clemency petition for a woman who had been convicted of killing her abusive husband at a time in Missouri where you could not admit evidence of abuse. This woman, Linda Branch, was given essentially life without parole. And Amy, with her partner Amy, we called them the Amys, wrote this clemency petition. Missouri University was joined by the other three universities in the Missouri Battered Women's Clemency Coalition. All four schools wrote petitions for a total of 11 women like our client. Keep in mind that clemency petitions have no blueprint. So Amy volunteered for something. I couldn't tell her how to do it. No one in the other faculties knew how to do it. But Amy, sure, I'll do it. And so she began to look at this case. She got the old transcripts, and she told me that there were two witnesses that the lawyers could not find who would really have been critical to the defense of Linda Branch's case. And she tells me she's going to find them. And I'm thinking, that trial was like 15 years ago. Licensed attorneys in this town could not find these two witnesses. I'm thinking she's never going to find these witnesses. Within the week, she had found both women in various places in southern Missouri. She had talked to them. She had confirmed that they really could testify to, or could have testified to, what they were supposed to have testified to. That was the first of Amy's completed Hail Mary passes in my book. So she finished her petition with the other Amy, and we filed it with the 10 other petitions of the Battered Women's Clemency Coalition to Governor Carnahan, who died shortly thereafter. And so the petitions were not considered until 4 years later when Governor Holden was in office. By then, Amy was a graduate working at Thompson Coburn, right? And she re-involved herself and began to capitalize on her contacts through her firm to politic this petition with the governor. You may or may not know that clemency petitions are highly political, and you almost have to be clairvoyant. In any case, the end result was that 2 of the 11 petitions were granted, and 1 was Amy's. And so the governor commuted Linda Branch's sentence, and the Missouri Board of Probation and Parole promptly refused to honor it. And that's another story, but the clinic ended up in the Missouri Supreme Court over that before we finally got Amy's client out of prison. Amy watched this whole thing. She was on the phone to me. She carefully shepherded it. Well, we only got 2 women out of prison, so there were more women still in prison, and so we wrote a new law, passed it. The clinics filed petitions for parole for some of the remaining incarcerated women and filed them with the Missouri Board of Probation and Parole, and they promptly denied it again, or these new petitions for parole again. And at that point, Amy re-entered the picture, took charge, and wrote extraordinary writs to the Cole County Court under an untested law, no precedent, no blueprint again. She filed this, she argued it, and she won, which I would say was her second completed Hail Mary pass. But the Missouri Board of Probation and Parole, again, refused to honor it. Undaunted, she writes another one, and she goes right back to the Cole County Court, and it makes it very plain. I'm not giving up. I'm here until I win. So they once again grant her extraordinary writs, and this time the Missouri Board of Probation and Parole released or gave release dates to all of the remaining women. I have to digress here. When Amy was in the clinic, she was engaged, and she had accepted a job to Thompson Coburn, and she told me she was not having any children. Okay. So some years later, after she had had her 2 daughters, her husband will tell me that she is crazy about her girls and that he is very proud of his wife because she, and I'm quoting here, stands up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Amy's work for her, quote, ladies, as her girls call them, has not gone unnoticed. She has received a whole bunch of awards. It would take me too long to go through them all. She is the Missouri Lawyer of the Year one year. She was awarded the Pro Bono Publico Award by the American Bar Association. She has an award from St. Louis U, also for her work in social justice, as well as an International Women's Award for social justice, and the list goes on and on. Mike Moser, her husband, did tell me that Amy balances her family life with her work. By the way, did I mention that she moved from Thompson Coburn to Bryan Cave before Armstrong Teasdale finally wooed her and gave her a partnership where she is today? She does complex personal injury litigation in multiple state jurisdictions and federal jurisdictions, including what is called difficult state jurisdictions. I think that means that no other attorney wants to go there. But Amy, that knee-jerk response to take on hard things, goes there, and she is very successful. In closing, I would say that Amy can tell you today, as law students, how to be successful at family life, paid work, and pro bono work. She just got a call from one of our clemency clients 2 minutes ago. Her daughters hold her accountable for getting women out of prison and ask her, according to their father, they describe her as the prison people just don't understand, and mommy is going to have to make them understand. So this is a remarkable young woman. The women that she gets out of prison mentor her persistence because she just does not give up. No is just not a word in her language. And she has become the Hail Mary pass girl. Amy.
Wow. Thank you, Mary. I hope I can live up to that introduction. That's a lot of build-up and a lot of pressure, so hopefully it'll be worth it. Thank you for having me here today. As Mary described, my primary practice area is civil litigation, completely unrelated to what I'm here to talk to you about today, which is really my favorite practice area, which is my pro bono work. I started it right here, as Mary said, at the University of Missouri in the law clinic where Mary was my hero. She had the domestic violence clinic just like she does today, and that was one of the reasons that I actually selected this law school, was I was really interested in Mary's clinic. Domestic violence issues are something that I cared about a lot, and I wanted the opportunity to try that out as an area of practice. And was lucky enough to get in, and shortly after getting to be in the class a little, working on some of the clinic cases, Mary pulled me aside along with a few other people and said, hey, I've got this special project that we're working on. We have a group of women that we've teamed up with the other law schools in our state on, and They're all in prison. They were all victims of domestic violence, and would you like to help get them out of prison? So I thought, great, that sounds like terrific time, good fun, and really important cause, and was happy to volunteer until we kind of saw what we were facing, and then I had some second thoughts. I never gave up, but I had some second thoughts because these convictions were really, really old. Some of these women, by the time they were released, had been in prison over 30 years. There were no post-trial remedies available to them. Really, the only thing available to them was a clemency petition. And I was assigned the case of Linda Branch. Linda's case really touched my heart because it was just so unfair. You know, reading the case file, looking at the photographs, it was a situation where she had been in a relationship and in a marriage with a man for a very long period of time. During that time, he had systematically beat her, abused her daughter, had beat her to the point that she had had multiple miscarriages and had just suffered horrendous violence. And then she was tried for killing that person. She killed him on the very day that he said that he was going to kill her. He brought a gun into the room to confront her. Immediately prior to this confrontation, he had accused her of having an affair and had actually strapped her down to the dining room table and stuck a candle into her vagina and lit it. And the jury got to hear none of it. It was all excluded at her trial. All they got to hear was evidence about the fact that this killing had occurred without hearing the whole story. And the reason was, at the time, domestic violence, if the killing didn't happen in the heat of battle where you could make a traditional self-defense case, it didn't come in. It was considered to be not relevant, it was prejudicial. And the problem is that the jury only heard a little tiny part of the story. They didn't hear all of the circumstances of the crime to give a true and fair verdict about what had actually happened and if it was really murder. And so Linda was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole ever for killing her husband after that horrific act of violence that had been perpetrated on her. I remember seeing some photographs of her in the file and going to the prison for the first time. I had a certain image in my mind about what that experience was going to be like, what she was going to be like. It was nothing like any of that. And I would recommend to all of you, if you're going to be a lawyer, go to prison. And do it before you even take the oath. Meet somebody that's been in prison, because it's an experience like no other. By the time I met Linda, she had been in prison for about 15 years. She looked nothing like the photograph. And I'm not talking about just age. Being in prison does something to you. She was beaten down. She looked terrible. And she had lived a very hard life for 15 years because of something that had happened to her. While she may have exercised some bad judgment, she didn't deserve to be there. She just didn't. And it was horrible. The prison itself was just sort of a horrible environment. And don't get me wrong, some people completely deserve to be in prison. But it is one of the most sort of horrible things that you can do to somebody, to completely take away all their freedom. Everything about being a human being is basically taken away from you, and if you don't deserve it, it's about the worst thing that you can do to somebody. So it was a very emotional experience to meet her, and it kind of charged me up, and we all knew that it was a long shot. All the ladies in the coalition were long shots, and all of them had had similarly just horrible cases, and all of the people in the coalition never got to introduce the evidence of the abuse they had suffered at their trials. And so there's a whole class of people in the state of Missouri that were serving horrendous prison sentences, very long. And if the law had been the same as when I was in law school, they probably wouldn't have ever been there, because the jury would have heard all this evidence and they could have made a different decision at that time. So Mary was a wonderful hero for taking Linda's case and for dragging us out to the Chillicothe prison on a regular basis. We made lots of trips by ourselves. It was like a field trip. I don't know if any of you have been in Mary's clinic, but we always, made it a fun time, even though we were going to do something very serious, road trip with the van and all the kids in the van and go out there and spent I would say about 9 months by the time it was over, just working on Linda's case, focusing in on it, writing a clemency petition, trying to highlight sort of the procedural problems with her case, and she had a lot of them, and trying to highlight just sort of the very sympathetic facts of her case, which there were also a lot of them. It was, Mary says there's no blueprint. It was an easy petition for me to write because I was so outraged about what had occurred. And so when we submitted it, I knew that there was a long shot, but I felt good because I knew I had done what I could do. When Governor Carnahan died and didn't get to look at our petitions, a lot of our hopes died with it because he had been so receptive to all these petitions, and then we were starting over from scratch with first an interim governor, and then after that, Governor Holden, who didn't know anything about the cases. We hoped that he would be sympathetic, but he just didn't know anything about the cases. And luckily, I had the opportunity to help educate him on that, along with Mary and a lot of the other lawyers in the coalition. I also had just sort of a wonderful happenstance, which is while I was out practicing law, I happened to work with and become really good friends with somebody who ended up being the guy reviewing the clemency petitions. So that was extremely helpful and allowed me to, lobby for them in a different kind of way. And so luckily, Linda's was one of the two that were granted. It was a wonderful experience that I never would have had if I hadn't had the opportunity here at MU to do it, and Mary hadn't been so wonderful to volunteer to take those cases. And so when that experience continued, I was a huge fan of the work that the clinic did here. They really, when the parole board denied Linda her parole, which was what the governor had given her, the right for parole, they never gave up. They took it all the way up to the Missouri Supreme Court until they saw Linda go free. And that was huge for me personally. Just to see work that I did as a student, that you think sometimes the things that you do as a student don't have a lot of meaning. But to see that actually have somebody walk out of prison and change their life. And I'll see Linda from time to time. She'll show up at presentations like this, or she'll show up if I have something in Jeff City, and it's a surreal moment to turn around and see her there, and to see her look so much better and younger and happier than the first time I saw her back in the late 90s is just an incredible experience. And I think that kind of highlights what Pro Bono Month is for law students. Just because you're a student does not mean that you can't do something that's big, that changes somebody's life, and that in the process changes your own life. It changed my life to be able to help with Linda's case and to be able to be introduced to those cases. And it changed my life so much that I was really happy to help with some additional cases. I talked to Mary. She was having some difficulties getting the parole board to kind of rule on some really important petitions that were for the remaining women. So I was happy to jump into the representation and just take it to the mat, and the cases were equally sympathetic. One of the cases that she had was probably, in my opinion, one of the most sympathetic in the group, a woman named Carleen Borden. Carleen was 13 years old when she married her 21-year-old husband, who was a police officer in the little town that they lived in. After they got married, he proceeded to beat her regularly. She was seen with many injuries at different times. He sexually assaulted her on numerous occasions during the course of their marriage. She had 2 children with him. We found out only in sort of the end of what was going on from one of the daughters that she had also been sexually assaulted by her father when she reached about the same age Carleen was when she married this man. And the son was so frightened of his father that he told me that when he would hear his father's voice, there were times that he would literally pee his pants because he was so frightened of the man. She was convicted of shooting her husband. Prior to shooting him, she had filed for divorce on numerous occasions. She had left him. She had went into hiding. He would find her. On occasions, he hired a private investigator to locate her. At one point, he stole her car to get her to come back. He threatened their children. And she had just made a lot of efforts to get away from this guy. When he was shot, and she ended up being charged with a crime. Unfortunately, the lawyer that was appointed to represent Carlene at her criminal trial for killing her husband was the divorce lawyer that represented her husband in the divorce. A civil lawyer that had no experience in criminal law, that had represented the deceased, was the person that was supposed to protect her from going to prison. And she raised that it was a conflict, that she didn't want this lawyer. She was forced to keep the lawyer to proceed with no representation. And so she did. He did no pretrial discovery, didn't find anything out about the case before the case was tried, filed no pretrial motions, basically put on no evidence except her testimony. And not surprisingly, given that he was a police officer in the town, there was a lot of outrage in the town about the crime. She tried to put on evidence of the abuse. That was not permitted. It was considered to be irrelevant because the killing did not occur in the heat of battle. And she was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for 50 years. Just a horrendously long sentence. And the jury never got to hear everything that led up to it. After she was finally convicted, she said, "Look, I don't think this lawyer that you appointed to me did a very good job. He did, we had this problem. I think that there was a conflict, but also, he just didn't do a very good job. I want to appeal based on ineffective assistance of counsel." So the court said, okay, and appointed his law partner to represent her in her criminal appeal to basically say, my partner screwed up in this case, and so you should give this person a new trial. She again raised the fact that I think that this is a conflict. I don't want this lawyer. It was denied. She had to proceed with the appointed lawyer or nobody at all. She appealed. He didn't include pretty much the only evidence, like 50 pages of her testimony, never made it into the record. That was pretty much the only evidence that they had put on. There's nothing to review. Her appeal was denied. And that had pretty much been the status of her case. There was a few other post-trial things, but that was pretty much the status of the case when Mary first took the case. She was in the initial group. Some other students worked on her petition. But I was happy to take over her representation because she was one of the ladies that were left, one of the last four in the group that the parole board was kind of holding on to them. There was the statute that said that they could petition for parole, and the coalition had fought very, very hard for the statute. These four women met all the criteria. They were the only people we were aware of in the whole state that met all the criteria. It was basically written for them. And yet the parole board wouldn't determine even if they were eligible to be considered for parole. By the time I got involved, they had sat on it for 7 months and just hadn't made a decision at all. So I started a telephone campaign. I started stalking them anywhere I could make a call or find out what was going on. Finally, I threatened to file a writ, and as a miracle from God, on the day that I said I was going to file the writ, they made a decision that they were in fact eligible under the statute and they would set hearings, which was wonderful. And so they set the hearings, and I think that you heard from Mary how that went. We went in there, we represented them at the hearings. Mary did an excellent job with one of them. I took another one, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But unfortunately, Carlene was denied parole, and she was denied parole because they didn't think that it was in the best interest of society for her to be released at this time. At that time, she had served over 30 years in prison. So that was a very disappointing result. And we filed a writ. I spearheaded the writ. Mary was also involved in it and did an excellent job. And we were able to get those decisions thrown out. It was denied a second time. We were able to get that decision thrown out. And then luckily, that court really was the hero because they took the hand in making sure that the parole board understood what they were supposed to be doing, which is a lot of what we were confronting. They told the parole board they could only consider very discrete things that were set out in the statute. And all of those things basically said, is this person going to violate the law after they get out of prison? It's not about judgment about what they did before. It's not about, we've already made a determination on that. You're just supposed to determine, are these dangerous people that should be out in society or not? And if they're not, then you need to let them out. And with that criteria, when it was just about our women, then there was really no question they had to be released. And so Carlene was lucky enough to be one of the ladies that was released, and that was an amazing experience to watch her with Mary walk out of prison, and that happened, I guess, in 2010. The other lady that we were helping through that project was a woman named Vicki Williams. Her case came out of the St. Louis area. She also likewise had very sympathetic facts. The violence in her case also involved her children. It was very, very sad. Her husband beat her son, beat her daughter, and what kind of killed me about the violence in her case was how many people had seen it and done nothing about it leading up to this killing. There were multiple people who gave me affidavits, and I looked at them like, where were you at the time that all this was going on? More than one person recounted that they had seen Vicki be hung upside down in a closet and be beaten by her husband with people there, which was just absolutely astonishing to me. She was tried in St. Louis County. She attempted to put on evidence of abuse. It was all excluded, and she served 32 years in prison before she was finally released through our project. She called me just a few minutes before this presentation. I gotta tell you, I was worried when these ladies were released. Both of these two had been in prison so long that you wonder if you could ever be out of prison and be normal after that. And they've done great. They have reconnected with their families. They have lived amazing lives. They have been productive members of society. Our ladies work. They have jobs. And really that's been sort of the universal thing for everybody in the project. Of the original group of women, I think that there were 12. It was 11 or 12. There was one that was sort of in and then out because she didn't meet all the criteria. They're all out of prison now. And it feels great to have been a part of that. And you should all be proud that this university played a huge role in seeing that group of women in Missouri's history, that's now been corrected. Those women are out, they're free, and that our state has changed the law, but now the sentences have been changed too. And it wouldn't have happened if it weren't for students that volunteered their time and took on these causes. I've also been very lucky since then to be confronted with a couple more cases that I've taken on the representations for. They are cases that are newer than the ones we had in the clinic, but they were cases that involved domestic violence where really the killing was a self-defense killing, and these women are serving really unfair sentences given the self-defense. One of them is Tanya Mitchell, and we had filed a clemency petition for Tanya, as well as some things with the parole board. And I have a short clemency video that was put together. She participated in a documentary with us. We put together a video with some of the stuff from the documentary, and they were good to help us with that. And I thought that instead of me telling you about our case, we would just play the short video, and that would kind of bring it to life a little more. So.
911.
My neighbor's just come in here screaming, help me, and she thinks she shot her husband.
Okay. By accident or on purpose or what?
I don't know, sir. I know that he does beat on her. Was he beating you, Tanya?
Sir?
She's crying, too.
Okay, keep...
Don't let him get her.
Listen, Tanya, listen. Tanya, listen to me. Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. Now, Tanya, he's on the other phone, okay? He's talking to us right now, all right? So he's not coming next door, understand? He doesn't know where you're at. Listen, no. Listen. He don't know where you're at.
Yes, he does.
No, he don't. Okay, now listen closely. Did he beat you up?
No, not today.
Why did you shoot him with a gun?
I don't know. He said he's going to kill me.
He said he was going to kill you.
No, I know he's going to kill me.
My name is Tanya Mitchell, and I'm 47 years old. I am currently incarcerated at WERDCC in Vandalia, Missouri. I was actually charged with first-degree murder, armed criminal action, and I pled to voluntary manslaughter. The conditions were open-ended at 5 to 15, and the judge set the sentencing at 15. We got married in 1994. He pretty much told me that we were going to get married at gunpoint. By that time, we had been together for a long time, and I was ready to get out of the relationship because I knew it was abusive. But he wasn't going to let me go at this point. He said if he couldn't have me, nobody could have me, and he meant it. And so he told me at gunpoint that we were getting married, and we flew to Vegas. It was real hard to take, thinking here I am going to have to marry this man whom I loved my whole life, just thought the world of. And the abuse just kept getting more severe and worse, and I'm stuck. At every turn I wanted to leave, but where would I go? What would I do?
When I was developing this book for her last parole hearing and going through boxes and boxes of pictures that her co-workers actually had taken and given to my aunt after she was arrested, this picture, I actually found this in some of my mom's stuff, but this picture was taken 3 days after Tanya and Jim got married in Vegas. And out of all of the pictures that have just these horrible images of her, this was one that just really kind of got to me, because here you've just gotten married and she comes back for her wedding shower and she has 2 black eyes. And in a room full of about 30 women, most of whom were partners or wives of people who were in the motorcycle club, not one person said a thing to her, including us, about the fact that she had 2 black eyes. It was just as if nothing had ever happened while we were playing games and everything that you would do at a bridal shower. And it just disgusted me, the fact that that's what everyone's approach was. Instead of someone saying, can you get an annulment? Can you run away? Everybody just kind of brushed it off like it was nothing. And it really just, even when she was flipping through the book earlier today, when she got to this picture, I just thought, how horrible to have to live a life like that and have everybody around you not say a word about it.
I didn't tell my family about the abuse. I was ashamed of it.
When did they eventually find out?
I don't think my family really even knew the extent of the abuse until I went to jail. Some people at work I confided in. I pretty much had to, because I went into work with black eyes all the time and beat up and couldn't walk, been beat with a bat, whatever. Bruises on my forehead from playing Russian roulette, taking the gun and jabbing my forehead with it, putting a bullet in, spinning it, pulling the trigger. So of course they would ask questions, and I would tell them, but I would try to tell them in a funny way, like, oh yeah, he did this and this, and I would try to make light of it. I don't know why I did that, but that's the way it happened. There was a short window there when I did leave, and I wanted to stay away, and I tried to stay away, but he kept coming and getting me and finding me. And then once he said, you're not going anywhere, well, I wasn't going anywhere. People at work, and some, different ones, would give me the number of the shelter and things like that, and tell me to have, stuff in the basement or in the car or at their house or whatever, the things that I might need, because I had left on many occasions. But one day he found a note that had the shelter's phone number on it, and he found it, and he come in, what's this, cussing me, going off. He said, you think you're going to go there? I don't think so. Put me in the truck, drove me to the shelter, and said, here it is, in case you need to know. And I had no idea that that's what it was, even was a shelter, or if he was telling the truth or not. And it wasn't until years later that I found out that that really was the shelter. And he told me about how their security system sucked, and go ahead and go on in there, because he wouldn't have no trouble getting me back out and all this. So of course I was scared and wouldn't go. It scared the people I worked with too, and the ones that were helping me. It got to a point where he had called them at home and threatened them. And they were like, hey, we can't help you no more. This is too dangerous for not only us, but for their families.
What did he threaten them with?
Oh, to kill them. Oh, yeah. And to tell you in detail how he was going to do it.
This is a prepaid
Tanya Mitchell. Hi, Mom. I just called to tell you I love you.
I love you too, and I'm on my way up there. See you in a little bit, even though I can't say anything to you.
Okay, just know that I love you. Everything's going to be fine. God's going to be in the room with us and just take care of everything.
All righty, I look at it that way too, so.
I love you, sissy. Good luck.
Oh, I love you guys. Just call.
All right. Well, stay strong. You sound great. Okay?
Okay.
All
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
How long did it take for the abuse to escalate?
We were together 20 years, so it escalated over a period of time. Just years into it, it would just got worse and worse and worse, and more severe. The beatings weren't just a whap, a black eye here or there. They would last for hours and hours on end. Yeah, one of the most severe beatings was about 18 hours long. He would just rest and take breaks in between there. He would beat me up with whatever was handy in the household, the screwdriver handle on my head, put a big knot up there, his fist, black both my eyes. Had bruises all up and down my body from, I don't know what he had in his hand then, I don't even remember. Grabbed a pair of pliers, had the pliers around my toe, trying to pull my toes and toenails off. And yeah, it lasted a very long time. After one of the 18-hour beatings, and he was, just on one of those moods and was threatening to beat my ass and all this, and I was crying, and I was like, you promised you wouldn't beat me no more, you promised me, and now look at you. And he said, yeah, you're right, I'm not going to beat you no more, I'm just going to kill you.
I think that women like Tanya Mitchell were actually acting reasonably in self-defense. I think that she may very well have been right, that she would have died within an hour, and that these sorts of questions about when she can pull the trigger and when she can't, I think that's sort of silly. I think she was going to die that day. The reason she didn't die that day is because she pulled the trigger.
I thought that because he didn't have a family life like I had with a good family, and know the love that like my family would give to me, I thought since he didn't have that, that if he did know what that felt like if I could just love him enough where he would know how that all felt, that he would be good all the time. I thought that was the answer, that he just needed to know what it felt like to be loved. I don't really remember a lot about the incident itself, because things that I do remember, I don't remember the sequence or how it happened or whatever, but I do know that morning when he come into the bedroom and got me and wanted some breakfast, and I didn't have none ready. I hadn't been asleep very long from the time I got off work. That I don't know if I can do this. He said it wasn't my lucky day, and that his big decision was how he was going to kill me. And from that point on, fear was just instilled in me, and I snapped sometime that evening.
All right. I'm ready. I'm ready. Collect call from Tanya.
I went back a few minutes ago and got my answer from the parole board.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
I got a date.
You got a date. When?
It's January 21st, 2015.
Huh? 2015?
I know, Mama, but at least it's a date.
My God, that's 4 years away yet. 5 almost.
It's only like a little over 4 years, about 4 years and 10 months.
Well, it's still a ripoff. That's your date to get out anyway, right?
Right, yeah, that's my conditional release.
Oh.
They give me.
All right. I don't accept it.
Huh?
I don't accept it.
Recorded.
I don't accept it at all. I'm gonna let them know too. Okay, here's Tanya's room. I pretty well decorated it with stuff from yard sales, garage sales, thrift stores. Everything's ready for her. There's even clothes in her drawers. We'll probably have to wash because they've been in there since I've moved out here in 2005. But this is her room.
We're all getting older, and we missed several years together when she had a rough relationship, and now since the incident happened, it's been a rough road for her, so we'd like to have some closure and have some time together.
We just want her home, just get her home.
People just don't understand the fear that women go through with an abuser. They, the fear is so real, and you have reason to fear, but for some reason people just, if it's your husband, they just don't think it's that big a deal, you know. But if it would be a stranger or a serial killer or something, then they would be like, oh, we got to do something about this. Fear is fear, no matter who's putting it on you, whether it's a stranger or your husband. The fear is still real, and that's what I just wish people would understand, that the fear is real. You know, most people, I don't think, know what the fear's like that I've been through. I don't think most people are alive to tell you about it. I think that most people that feel that fear, that intense, they're not around to tell you about it. They're dead.
So we submitted that, the Tanya's clemency petition, and I felt like kind of a failure on Tanya's case because we had this petition on file for a really long time and haven't been able to get the governor to pay any attention to it yet. They've paid attention to it, but just nothing had been done for a lot of different reasons, although there had been interest. However, I actually had a little good news on Tanya's case. We had also filed a petition with the parole board because she had a time credit date coming up to basically try to get them to change their mind. And as you can probably tell, we haven't had the best luck with the parole board in our group. So when I filed this petition, I told her that I just want you to know this isn't going to happen. But we're going to try it because there's nothing to lose. We filed a big petition. We gave them the video where her mom says that I'm going to tell them about it and all this stuff. We did the whole bit, and I was just informed last week they're releasing her on October 21st. They changed their mind. So that was a really, really happy moment. I'm really excited to share that. So we'll all be excited to go to the prison and watch her get to go home with her mom and sister, who you saw in the video. So we're really excited about that. The other case that I have right now is a woman named Donna Bernacki. She is imprisoned out at Chillicothe. She is serving a 25-year sentence for killing her husband. She has MS, along with a lot of other physical ailments. At the time she shot her husband, she was actually walking with a cane and had hearing problems and all kinds of other different issues. She had 4 little girls at the time of the crime. Her husband had abused 3 of the 4 of them and had a serious drug problem. And at the time she shot him, he actually tested positive for cocaine and meth. He was just basically going crazy, had threatened her, had threatened the kids. She shot him, and she had a trial. She was permitted to put on evidence of battered spouse syndrome. Her lawyers at the time, however, did, I'm going to say, not the best job ever on the jury instructions. because it's kind of a 3-part instruction you get for battered spouse syndrome. They submitted part 1, but not 2 or 3. So the jury never got to see the part of the instruction that said, hey, you can use this evidence to acquit her, and here's how you do it. So that's a big problem. So she was convicted. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. They were looking for a lawyer to help represent her on a federal writ after her conviction, and there were some advocacy groups involved in it, and they darkened the doors of many, many places in town and were not able to find her a lawyer. Finally, they got to me, and I said, well, I'm interested in this. What is the situation with the statute of limitations? Because you only have a certain amount of time. And they looked at me like I had a second head. What statute of limitations? I don't know what's happening. It had been blown by a month by the time she got to me. They were not able to find her a lawyer in time to be able to get her a federal review of her case and this horrible jury instruction. So unfortunately, what we were left with for her case is a clemency from the governor. That's what can save her at this point. So we filed a petition before Governor Nixon. We're very hopeful that he'll give it due consideration. And we're hopeful that maybe around the holidays, sometime this year or next year, that we'll have some good news for her too. So that's a little bit about my pro bono work. I will just tell you that in your career, people go into law school with a lot of kind of big thoughts about things that they want to do. And I know that when you get out into practice, a lot of other things take over. This is a small amount of what I do. Most of my other work is civil practice. I've always practiced at big firms. There's pressure from hours and family and all kinds of other things, other clients. But let me just tell you that it doesn't have to be your whole practice to be able to make a difference. You can just take a few cases and do something that's significant with your other practice, and it will absolutely change your life. It'll change your career, and it'll help you use your law degree to change somebody else's life. We have a special obligation as lawyers to help people that are in prison. We are the only people in the world that can help people that are in prison get out. And if they don't have lawyers that are volunteer to help them, they won't have it. People like Tanya, people like Donna, people like Linda and Carlene, Vicky, all of them, they would still be in prison if it weren't for people volunteering their time. And in some cases, it didn't even, it took a lot of determination and time, but in the big scheme, it wasn't even that much time. So I would just encourage you to make time for it in your career. You won't regret it. I've not regretted it. It has been the most fulfilling thing I've done as a lawyer. My pro bono cases are the cases that have really made me feel like a real lawyer. And I've loved it, and I would encourage you all to do it. And I'll take questions at this time. Yes?
I was wondering if any of the women you've helped got back in a relationship?
Some of the women in the group have gone back into a relationship. The ones that I have personally represented have not been in any relationships after being released, other than one, I think, has been in a relationship. We don't have any information that that's abusive. They seem to be happy and all of that. I know that Shirley Lute, one of the women that was in the original group, she was in her 70s after she released, and she was actually able to go out and get married. And they've been married a couple years, and they seem to be happy. So I don't think it's impossible. I think a lot of them are pretty cautious. I would be too. So. Anyone else? Yes?
I'm in the clinic, and we had a chance to watch a longer version, half of the perfect victim video.
Great.
Parts of that were in the video you showed. But I remember one of the women saying that her lawyer didn't want to put on evidence of the abuse because it would give her motive. I know the law's changed since, but do you think that's still a concern for a lot of defense lawyers?
It's hard to speak for what's a concern in a particular case. It was a really big concern back then because remember that there's not going to be a jury instruction that says that they can acquit you if you're abused. Chances are you're going to have trouble getting that evidence on anyway. But in a case where there isn't a motive apparent, if you testified about that, they could use it as motive. And, you killed him because he beat you up was not a defense. It was just a reason that you killed him. And so that was not necessarily helpful testimony. So it was a huge concern. Now I think it's somewhat less of a concern because there are some remedies available at law. You can get a jury instruction if you actually submit one that they can use to consider that to acquit you. So I think it's less of an issue now than it was. You know, every case is different, but I think it's better now in terms of that. Anyone else? Yes.
You mentioned that now since the law has changed to recognize the battered spouse syndrome, the cases you're working on right now are a bit different. In the past, it was that they didn't put that on as evidence.
Right.
And so it wasn't considered at all. Now it's just the attorney's fault when they just messed up the trial.
Well, it depends on the case. Tanya's case I just took because it seemed incredibly unfair to me that she was serving a 15-year sentence and that nobody would let her out of prison, and there's pictures of her face all viewed up, so that seemed unfair. The other one, Donna, she had a horrible issue with her jury instructions, and so also she had some of the evidence excluded, like they disputed the abuse, but they wouldn't let her put in the police reports, or the police would come to the house, and for previous calls for domestic violence and all the orders of protection that she filed against him didn't come into evidence, things like that. You know, you can have a good law, but if the law isn't implemented well because of bad lawyering or bad rulings, then you still have an unfair result. So. Anyone else?
I'm pretty much going to have to move us out of here because there's
Sure.
other people over here.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming.